So there's some things that just shouldn't be contagious. I think that bad middle school romances are one of the things that shouldn't be contagious. I think that some of the inane comments left on Facebook shouldn't be contagious. But unfortunately, when you're on a naval warship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a lot of things become contagious. Bad jokes, farts that start smelling the same, clothing that never gets washed, stories that you've heard time and time and time again. And unfortunately, worst of all, human vomit. Particularly when you've been at sea for a long time and the waves start getting rough and no one can manage to keep their food down. And it's one of those things that when you experience viscerally, sometimes it just affects you too. And I'll never forget when I found myself in that situation, and I was trying to have a conversation with my boss. He was asking me about some of the things I was taking care of that day, and I remember saying, "Excuse me just a second," and I leaned over into the trash can, left my breakfast there, stood back up and resumed the conversation, wishing that he would end the conversation so I could get something to drink. I realized as the seas were dying down, as we were sort of getting rid of the storm, that we needed a break, that things needed to get better. And Saturday rolled around, and even though you wouldn't think that weekends make much of a difference when you're out at sea, they do sometimes. And I remember that particular day we were off the coast of Nicaragua, and I went up to the captain's stateroom and I knocked on his door. I said, "Sir, the men need a break. We need a rest. We need to do something for the guys on the ship." And he said, "Well, what do you have in mind?" And I said, "Well, what if we just drop anchor and everybody gets to swim?" And like any learned naval officer, he said, "Oh, we couldn't do that. Couldn't do that. There's no protocol for that. There's no precedent, right? There's no example. How could we possibly do it properly?" And so I said, "Well, look, if I get you something, buy lunch, is this something you would consider?" And he said, "Sure." And I remember being out there, connected to satellite internet, trying to search the internet for documentation that other ships had used for such an event, where you drop anchor and have people on lookout with sniper rifles ready to shoot sharks that come along, and you have people designating how many people are in the water at a certain time and who's going to be responsible as a lifeguard to make sure people don't drown and basically end up in the bottom of the ocean. And so I found such a document, and I wound up spending some time tailoring it to what would be appropriate for our ship, and bringing it back up to the captain's stateroom and showing it to him, and he was like, "So you're serious about this?" I said, "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Guys need a break, and I think this is the best way to do it." And I was never so happy as it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the ship came into a screeching halt, and I heard the anchor go out, heard all the chain drop, heard the whistle call, and they said swim call, and assembled everyone on the back deck. Only about half the guys had bathing suits, and half the guys went in their dirty boxers. And as people started jumping into the water with the watchful eyes of the snipers and the watchful eyes of the lifeguard, I just remember seeing people smile with reckless abandon at one another and treat one another in a really beautiful way. And I remember thinking in that moment that I'm so glad some things, like smile and joy, can be contagious. Thanks.
John, everybody.